So my boundary crossing journey essentially started in my undergraduate degree. So you can probably tell I'm from Scotland. And I was really, really fortunate actually that the year that I went to university they did a sort of a nationwide project teaching everybody that was in healthcare multi-professionally for the 4 years of the degree. So I had a great start in terms of understanding how everybody fits to the patient journey. Because the first thing we did at university on purpose was an MDT. So we did a simulated MDT on our first day, and we actually stuck with that MDT group for 2 years doing simulation every Wednesday, and then for our last 2 years actually going to hospital and clinical placements, working together, which was fantastic because we got a real good understanding of what everybody brings to the table, everybody's sort of roles are, responsibilities, where the boundaries are and where they blur. And it probably started me thinking, well actually, I'm not going to be handed into one box because I can already see the potential for me to do a little bit more. And it was great. We got to do cadaver stuff because we were learning the medics, and I truly believe my biology knowledge is much better because we were able to do that. Not such a popular thing now, but it was cool at the time. And then next step was probably when I got my first Band 7 role, and I was really fortunate with that. It was just pre-Agenda for Change. I rocked up to Glasgow Children's Hospital and they said, oh, we can see you've done lots of haematology oncology at Great Ormond Street. We actually have a Band 7 job and I've applied for a Band 6. Would you like it? And so I kind of just got it there and then on the spot, which just would not happen now, would it? But that was really well integrated into the team, and I didn't have to do any of the kind of core service stuff I would have done elsewhere, which kind of appealed to me. And there was a lot of autonomy came with that, so I actually landed up running my own clinics and things like that. And at that time there were no such things as sort of the outreach centres for cancer and things in Scotland. Every child that had cancer came to Glasgow for treatment, which obviously means a great deal of travel and things for them. And we looked at novel ways of addressing that. So actually our MDT used to go by helicopter to the islands 1 day a week as well. So quite a cool job, but helicopters aside, I really learned a lot, in terms of embedding that knowledge from university, working in a truly kind of multidisciplinary team, where a really defined role and probably quite an enhanced role. I'm a pharmacist by background, so not a nurse, not a doctor, not a healthcare scientist, but a pharmacist. And a lot of what I was doing was probably pushing the boundaries. I then decided to really push the boundaries, and I became the first pharmacist in the UK to become an advanced clinical practitioner. And that took a lot of smashing my head against not even glass ceilings, proper concrete floors, I think, because up until then it had predominantly been nurses that had gone through that sort of process. So not massively easy to get there, but definitely very rewarding. My career started in intensive care, so I trained as an intensive care advanced practitioner, and then moved into the emergency department from there. I've done a couple of other things in between. Then the opportunity came up for some development in urgent emergency care as a clinical fellow. And the advert said you had to be a GP or a hospital doctor. Actually, the role was exactly what I was doing. So I decided to really challenge that to the max, i.e. right into the head of HE saying it was very discriminatory. That why does it have to be that? And actually these people are 2 or 3 years qualified. I've got nearly 20 years experience. Why is this? And they caved and they let me do it. And it was really rewarding. I actually landed up doing it for 2 years. So I spent some time in HE and some time at NHSE as well as part of that, working on lots and lots of multidisciplinary projects. And then prior to the job that I'm in now, I was the course director for the MSc in Advanced Clinical Practice at London South Bank University. So this was the first time that this had opened up to multi-professional cohorts. Prior to that, you had to be a nurse. That's why when I did my advanced practice, although I was working in London, I had to go back to Scotland to do all my training because it was the only place that accepted pharmacists on an advanced practice course. So it was quite, when I saw that, I thought, I'm going to prove them wrong. You know, they should have let me on that course, go and lead it. And I employed Ant on our faculty as part of that, which was fantastic, because we then had that healthcare science element to it as well, which was great. And now I'm professionally for advanced practice at GOSH, which basically is overseeing the development of all professionals that we have across that advanced practice spectrum. So whether it's enhanced practice, advanced or consultant level practice. So making sure that as an organisation we're embracing that, not just focusing on nurses, but making sure that everybody's in rocks per table. So that's kind of my journey. How has it left me feeling? Well, for all the shit's Greeks fans here, there's this episode where Moira says to David, stop acting like a disgruntled pelican. And a lot of the time that is exactly how I feel, because although, on there's a lot of firsts, there's lots of things, it looks kind of positive, and lots of people say to me, like, you've achieved so much. I'm still so frustrated, because despite doing all that, I still have to sit in rooms now and justify why I can do what I can do. And I'm sure it probably speaks to lots of people here. It's just people don't take the time to understand what other people's roles are, what their experience is, what their education is, and what they can bring to the table. So a bit of a disgruntled pelican, but a sort of quite an adamant one that I'm not really beaten down. That's probably why I'm a bit Moira-esque, to be honest. So, why do I think there is this problem? I think it's the perception of healthcare. So, get a pyramid up. Don't tweet it or anything like that, it's probably slightly controversial. This is the NHS, isn't it, guys? And I was thinking about this on the way here, that actually we would still be holed up at home if it wasn't for everybody in this room and the work that they did during the pandemic. We wouldn't have moved beyond that. But all we hear in the prayers as doctors and nurses, and I kind of say it a little bit in jest, but it is a little bit sort of one of these things that leads to a bit of dissatisfaction in jobs, isn't it? But this is the perception still. I'm not saying in every organisation, because I have worked in places where the hierarchy is really quite flat. This is kind of what we have to deal with, which makes it really, really difficult. So, wanted you to think about your experiences of cross-disciplinary education. So when you've gone to an event that says, yeah, it's multi-professional, how has that been? Anybody got any positive experiences of that to share? Yes.
We had our first interprofessional symposium last month, and we invited the... You want me to... Thank you. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah.
So we held our first interprofessional symposium at the university last month. We invited anyone, but we went through our nursing colleagues, our AHP colleagues, and our biomedical science contacts with it. And so we had invited nurses to talk, we invited consultants, clinical scientists to talk, plus biomedical scientists. It was a mixture of virtual and face-to-face. It was pulled together within 6 weeks, so we had lessons learned there, but it was very successful and the feedback was really, really positive.
Excellent, but it sounds like a lot of work went into planning that and getting the right faculty together and that sort of thing, which we're going to come to, so that's great. Anybody got a less than sort of advantageous experience?
Just because it's rather parallel to yours, I run an interprofessional education session as I'm a lecturer at Lincoln University, so we're the IMS accredited course, and we now work with medical school. And it's a really lovely session normally, but this time we invited a fantastic consultant haematologist who spoke pathology for 3 hours, which was the duration of the full speech. So it's very much mirroring your pyramid experience. And it wasn't that it wasn't educational, it was just not the purpose of interprofessional education, which was perhaps why it was less successful, but lessons learned for next year.
No, absolutely.
Thank you.
So sometimes, the paint that's in the tin is what it says on the tin when you go, and that's great, that's a good experience. sometimes though, you buy your lovely green paint, you dip your brush in and it's some hellish colour of red or something that's in there. And I think lots of places do this as a bit of an income generator. We're running this for doctors, I'm not just picking on doctors, but you know, we're running this for them, but anyone else can come along, that's absolutely fine, you know, for us to do that. And it doesn't quite land, because if there's not something in it for you, then it's not a good educational experience. I had a really bad experience with that, so in my early days as an ACP, there's an Australian charity that run a course called Basics in Intensive Care, and I was, you know, maybe halfway through my first year. I thought, great, they're running it in London, fantastic, let me go to Basics. The problem with Basics was that everybody really, really advanced, i.e. even consultants, turned up to go on the course, and then they completely pitched it at not Basics. To the point that I felt so psychologically unsafe, I didn't return to the last few days there. And this would cost like £1,500 my own money to do that. But it was like such a horrible experience. It was that old school sort of putting you on the spot in front of everybody, saying, how would you manage this, how would you do this? And actually, to be fair, I felt like the stuff I was contributing, because it was coming from a sort of pharmacy side of things. He's like, no, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, I know I'm right, because I spent a long time doing this. But it was a really bad experience for me. And it wasn't until a few years later, when they were running it, they asked me to be on the faculty. And I said, I don't think I can, actually, because I had this really, really bad experience. And the end result of that was actually, they did a huge sort of, we need to really think about this, and really put a kind of multi-professional hat on when we think about how we do this going forward. And I'm still part of that faculty. We teach all across the world, which has been fantastic. It was a real kind of horrible experience for me that really, really makes me think when I'm putting something on about how best to kind of tackle it. So, the science, first of all, or the evidence behind it. So, there's a really good study done on professional learning. It's focused on ambulatory and primary care, but it's a true kind of representation of lots and lots of different professions as part of it. And the advantages, none of them are groundbreaking, they're the sort of things that you would expect, but one of the key ones is actually a much better development of sort of personal relationships within that. And that's down to kind of better understanding of what each other's roles are. Networking, and we've just had a really great presentation on the power of a network, and there's so much work that's come out of that network, and I think it's a real good kind of demonstration of this. And even friendships actually was something that sort of came out of this, and I would mirror that with my kind of undergraduate experience, that lots of people that I trained with in different disciplines, we're still friends, we'll still text each other to say, hey, I've got this going on, and we still kind of have that MDT approach, even though it's 20 and a long bit years since we were all together, which is great. And I think that is what feeds really nicely into the improved patient care bit, because there's that collegiality going on. You want to help each other out, you want to understand, you want to kind of cross-pollinate. Improved education. So again, better understanding of each other's roles is part of that. But an increased sort of experience of the learning is also reported in that. Because of the peer learning, it can be really quite strong actually. Somebody just talking from their lens really enhances, I guess, the overall educational experience or the case that you're talking about or the particular topic that you're sort of thinking on. And it really helps you to understand how you can deliver right person, right place, and right time care to patients. Also, in terms of improved patient care, you can be a bit more prompt with your referral, because you can know 2 minutes into consultation, I'm going to need a dietitian to do this. So what's the point in me doing half an hour of this when I know they really need to see this person? And I did an audit once, because we didn't have a dietitian in the department that I worked in, on how much dietetic work I was doing, crossing over into that boundary, and it was nearly a day a week. It was a good test for, actually, we do need a dietitian, because if I wasn't doing this, none of this would be happening. An improved sort of diversification of skills as well. So if you use practitioners to their full potential, then you don't have this kind of silliness that sometimes we have of, right, you need a gastro referral, you need this referral, for something that's actually really, really minor. So I kind of got involved in a case the other day where a patient that was post-op was very expected to have constipation. The constipation wasn't being treated because they were waiting for the gastro referral. I was like, well, maybe we could just prescribe a laxative. Might be a good idea for us to do that. And all of this leads to increased job satisfaction. And that is more based around a better culture. So the better culture kind of evolves from this kind of behaviour. Much more positive interactions, particularly in communication. And actually in the research, email communication was the thing they felt actually had a much kind of more positive slant on it than other things. But also practitioners have a much bigger sense of ownership of their role because they've got a better understanding of where they all fit in the big picture. So none of this blaming them, blaming them, blaming them. We're all together, we're all one team. So the art of it, how do we actually go about doing it? Well, a lot of people think lectures are gold standard, and here I am standing doing one. But what do you think in terms of kind of multi-professional or cross-professional learning? Good way to do it?
When we do it, we have small breakout groups that are kind of differently understood by one member of the team. So you give an opportunity, so you have 3 students from each discipline, and it just gives them that chance to have kind of a safe conversation, rather like having been presented a case, and then we come back into the main room to discuss in more depth. It's just, you're more likely to get student engagement, in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, really hard to get engagement in a big group. So a lot of people would say it's the gold standard. If you want to truly deliver it as a cross-professional sort of session, you are going to need a huge investment in faculty, because really your faculty will need representation from all the professions. So it's a difficult way to do that in a true way. So a sort of different way of doing that, and something that we do in the Gosh Learning Academy for the simulation stuff, is that we kind of have a group of reviewers. So when we write a particular case, it goes around the multi-professional group to say, yeah, this ticks the boxes, you know, from our side of things, which I guess is a slightly smarter way of doing it, but it still takes a long time to get things done. It's often centered around real fixed learning points as well. So like, I've decided what I'm going to talk about today. Tough, you can like it or you can love it, sort of thing. So it doesn't really give a learner that opportunity to jump into the driving seat. And it's often quite difficult, I think, to drive it. So, you know, you're sort of saying going into breakout groups makes it easier, but driving it in a kind of lecture setting is really quite difficult. Cross-hat exercises, so these are really good. This is when you get the opportunity to kind of either observe or do somebody else's job. Probably the best experience of this for me was spending some time working with the housekeeping supervisors at work, because when I was in a sort of site practitioner role, so you're managing the whole hospital, the number one thing that you're worried about is beds. And it's always, oh, well, it hasn't been cleaned, it hasn't been this, it hasn't been that. One day I just thought, there's got to be something better we can do about this. And spent some time with the housekeeping supervisors. And it was things like, nobody, even though they all had phones in their pocket, nobody ever rings them and says, actually, that patient's gone now. Can you clear the bed? You know, that just didn't happen. So we were able to put in a whole new electronic system where within the patient was discharged, they were notified, they went and did the clean, and actually you then had, you know, a bit of a conveyor belt going on to allow things to keep moving. Sometimes, so some hospitals do, you know, spend a couple of days with the chief exec and that sort of thing as part of that. It can be quite good. Case-based exercises. So again, with these, often you're predetermining what the learning is in it. So sometimes there's a little bit of reduced flexibility within that. But quite a good way to do this, because it does sort of allow the learner to be quite immersive. I find with case-based exercises, especially when you do them in classrooms, you'll set half an hour for them to do it, perhaps, if you're lucky. They spend 10 minutes talking about Coronation Street, 10 minutes saying what the hell we're supposed to be doing, and then rush 10 minutes actually looking at the case. And sometimes the feedback It's a bit like pulling teeth when you try and pull it all together. It does work. I think there are kind of better ways that you can do it. We did a lot of using sort of pre-film simulation to do case-based stuff, particularly during the pandemic, which really, really helped. Just them actually seeing a monitor on the screen, for example, really helped people connect and learn with that. And action learning sets, I would say, in terms of the art of this, are the real kind of, this is the one where you're going to get the most kind of learning out of it. Because it's got problem-based learning at the heart of it. Quite often you can give the learners sort of pre-reading to do as part of that. You can allow them a little bit more time, so the whole session can be based around working on one problem or a couple of problems. But you need to be really prepared to facilitate it, because you are leaving the door open for anything to be thrown in the ring. There are a few things in health that you can do to kind of boundary that a little bit. So Nottingham Medical School have developed a really good clinical decision-making framework called Stop and Think. And they hate it when you get them to do it first, because you say, no, I want you to stop skipping to, because they'll go, no, I won't fill that box, that box. The diagnosis, I'll write 5 diagnoses. No, the whole point of this is I want you to think about the whole journey and what everyone's input is. And I think that can be quite a helpful thing to do. I'm going to talk about a way that we did this during the pandemic that was slightly off the wall, but worked really well. And then, you know, other things that I've done as part of that is, okay, there are your investigations, fantastic. Now put them in this spreadsheet, and I do use the private labs fees to do it, but this is what that's going to cost, you know, in terms of doing this. And because, of course, they put every test under the sun in there, don't they? So you can throw things in, I think, like that can be helpful as well. So what we did during the pandemic, this is my kind of co-production element. So lots of my students obviously were frontline clinicians. Many of them had children, many of them had multiple children. They also had partners that were working at home. And, you know, not every house has got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 laptops or tablets at their disposal. So we had lots of students that were saying, I really want to do the work. It's going to be really difficult for me to actually log in. The one thing that everybody had was a smartphone. The one thing that everybody was happy to use on that smartphone was WhatsApp. Now I'm not doing lessons on WhatsApp initially, thinking this is never going to work, you know, when that kind of came back. But we did use it actually to do the case studies asynchronously, and it worked brilliantly. So their recommendation didn't come from me, I wish it had, but I'll just be honest and say it didn't. They said, do we have to type it? And initially I was like, yeah, because obviously that's easier for me, I can print it off, I can look at it. Because they said we could do, you know, uploading the document that you've given us, or we could do a video talking about it, or a voice note. So I said, yeah, do you know what? Do whatever you want. It was a little bit more time for me to review all of that as part of that process, to then do, you know, kind of summing up to feed back to them. But it was such a rich learning experience because we had nurses, dietitians, physiotherapists as part of that. I deliberately kind of constructed cases that would involve all of those professions, and the learning was fantastic from it. We gave them a week to do it, so people could do it in their own time and they had time to focus on it, or they could, you know, visit, revisit. And the depth of response was much, much greater than ever I'd had when you do a case study in the classroom. It was, you know, they were all writing like 3 or 4 pages or like a 5-minute video or voice note or something in response. And what I did was, the following week, followed that up just with a bit of a debrief around, you know, actually you said this, or, you know, probably not quite right, you wouldn't admit, you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't do that. But really, you know, harnessing it on, this is fantastic, this is a really great learning point. And the feedback was great, and it, you know, it's now kind of integrated in what they do. Why is it so important to me? Well, I think for me, this is something that we can massively do in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion and education, because, you know, we can think about the different groups that this usually applies to. But belonging is really important. It's that bit about actually, if it's a tin of green paint that I've paid for, that I'm coming to, education's quite expensive sometimes, then it better be green paint in the inside. This is to be relevant to me. I have to be able to connect with it. I have to be able to enjoy it. There's a huge factor of that as well. So for me, it's about making sure that we balance that and making people feel that they belong. And